I want to talk to you because you are the phoenix, and this is the nest. And as the fable goes, there's fire all around. What happens next is up to you. Not you and your roommates, not you and your social media pals, just you. You know, about 80 years ago, a man called Winston Churchill, he spoke to the British people in the midst of a brutal Second World War. And what he wanted to talk about was the people who at that time were trying to put out the fire. And he said, in a very famous quote, "Never has so much been owed by so many to so few." You are the few. This is the time. There's fire all around us, isn't there? From our bullied environment to conflicts breaking out all over the place and social ills that we've never had to address in the past. It's time for the phoenix to rise above these. I'm a journalist. I work in zones of conflict, and my beat is to find out what happens to women and girls in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, South Sudan, Guatemala, but also on university campuses here in North America. And in the last few years, while I have been interviewing women and girls in these places, I started to realize there was a change in the way people were dealing. They were using something I call personal will. Let me explain. Malala Yousafzai would be a great example of personal will. Remember her, 15 years old, living in the Swat Valley? She wanted to go to school because she wanted to learn to think for herself, but girls were forbidden to go to school. But you know, there was no politician saying, send the girls to school. There was no public cry saying, why aren't our girls in school? Malala went to school and defied all of them. And the Taliban shot her in the head. So what happened next? She survived. And she started a movement that went all around the world about the value of girls' education. And now, Malala's known everywhere. You know her, I know her, my grandchildren know her. She's become the world's daughter, and she did it with personal will. There's another example. 160 little girls in Kenya between the ages of 3 and 17 sued the government of Kenya for failing to protect them from being raped. Imagine that. But you know there's a law in Kenya, it's called defilement. It's the rape law, but it's hardly ever used. Hardly anyone's arrested. Hardly anyone goes to court. Hardly anyone goes to jail. But this changed when a little girl called Millie, 12 years old, imagine, stood up at a village meeting in a village near Meru, which is about 4 hours north of Nairobi. And she said, I want to go to school, but I can't go to school because I'm pregnant. And I'm pregnant, excuse me, because that man sitting right over there raped me. That is personal will. And Millie's words started a case that ended up in the High Court of Kenya. And when they won it for 10 million girls in Kenya. You see, we've always depended on public will and political will to change up the agenda. You know, we push the politician to sign that paper to give us a new stop sign or a better law or a new shelter. But the politician is pushed by public will. Those of us who march, we sign petitions, we raise the roof to get the politician to make the change. And that has worked for us for decades. But now personal will, such as Malala's, such as Millie's, this is changing the way we are looking at the issues, the fires around us today. And this, in my opinion, is the style of the new change maker. Because you know what happens? Political will may lag behind, and public will may surge ahead or go into retreat. But what saves both of them is the person who stands up and says, what you're doing is not okay with me. That's personal will. And it is a style, especially among young people who see the wrongs and decide they're going to right them. And they do it by bringing personal will to the cause. We find out that power really is personal. You know, the Indigenous people in Canada experience this. I think they're quite a great example because the Indigenous people, they use political will and they use public will for decades, I dare say a century, but it didn't change the dial. Now it's personal. Now we know their stories. By sharing their stories, by being up close and personal, we get a much better understanding of where the problem lies. And I think at last, the Indigenous people, by using personal will, are beginning to alter the facts in their lives. You know, women and girls, that's the biggest change of all, in my opinion. Women and girls have been on a perilous journey of oppression and also wit and survival. Look, consider that a woman is burned at the stake because she has an opinion. Consider a woman is beheaded because she doesn't produce a male heir. Look at the abuses women over the centuries have had to deal with, from foot binding and female genital mutilation to sexual assault of all sorts. And I'm not only talking about countries that have historically oppressed women. I'm talking about even right here on this campus, because as long as women have to suffer abuse and misogyny and ridicule, we're not at the finish line. There's a job to be done, and it's personal will that's going to alter that kind of thinking. You know, women are more interested in policy than they are in power. And women are more interested in peace than having a piece of the turf. And women have long known that a sense of community is much more valuable than a sense of control. And women learned this through personal will. You know, there's been an alteration in the status of women. And that change has enabled the world to take on intractable files like violence, like poverty, like conflict. And it's because of the personal will people use to approach these files. Jeffrey Sachs, the renowned economist, said the status of women and the economy are directly related. Where one's flourishing, so is the other. Where one's in the ditch, so is the other. You've known that to be true for a long time. But when Jeffrey Sachs says it, it starts to get traction. And you know, the value for all of this is there has been a power shift. Jeremy Hymans and Henry Timms are the two researchers who examined old power that we're all familiar with and new power. Let me tell you the way they describe old power. Old power works like a currency. It's held by few. Once gained, it's jealously guarded, and the powerful have a substantial store of it to spend. It's closed, inaccessible, and leader-driven. It downloads and it captures. That sound familiar? Listen to the way they describe the new power. It operates like a current. It's made by many. It's open, participatory, and peer-driven. It uploads and distributes like water or electricity. It's most forceful when it surges. The goal with new power is not to hoard it, but to channel it. And their conclusion was that the hashtag #MeToo movement was a perfect example of how new power has altered the way we tackle a problem, because the participation of the many, all of them bringing their own stories, created the surge that carried the movement forward. You know, for the phoenix to rise, you have to be that person with the personal power. And I can tell you, it's not unusual to want to help someone in trouble, stop an injustice. What is rare is that people actually put action to those words. But the new change maker is the one to take that kind of step forward, to right the wrongs. You know, if you see evil, you can be altruistic and do something about it. Or you can look the other way. Remember Hannah Arendt, the writer and philosopher who spent much of her life trying to analyze the nature of good and evil. She's the woman who even went to Jerusalem to observe the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the man who bears much of the responsibility for the Holocaust. And she went because she thought if she looked in his face, she'd see what evil was. But you know what? She looked in his face, she saw a pretty ordinary guy. Hannah Arendt's conclusion is that evil thrives on apathy and cannot exist without it. Hence, apathy is evil. You see, when injustice encounters inertia, it uses that passivity exactly as though it were approval. And in the absence of protest, evil is nourished, and indeed, it can flourish. The nature of goodness, therefore, bears a very keen resemblance to intervention. People who seek to serve their conscience or simply want the quiet splendor of moral growth are obliged to get involved when something is wrong in the community, in the country, even in the world. But most people, as theater critic Walter Kerr once put it, cast themselves in the role of spectator, whatever the provocation, to take action. And they say, what do you expect from me? I'm only one person. I'm not rich. I'm not famous. I'm not powerful. How can I do anything? The trouble with that kind of thinking is that innocent bystander is sometimes an oxymoron. People who do not intervene when something is amiss give tacit permission for injustice to continue. But it takes awesome moral courage to go against the grain, to be the person who rises like a phoenix. Sometimes you risk the criticism of your colleagues, the wrath of society. It's been said that moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or even great intelligence. But I can tell you, it is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change a world that yields most painfully to change. Change doesn't come because we want it to come. Change happens because people get themselves involved in the process. People like you. And then the phoenix rises. Thank you.